Hello. Today we'll take a look at a game that is basically just of very low quality from both sides, and the reason for this is that the time control is 10 plus 0, which is kind of rapid chess, but not really. According to the FIDE rules, to qualify as rapid chess, both sides have to have 10 minutes or more, at least 10 minutes. I mean. And playing without increment is basically not chess in general. No one OTB plays chess without increment. The reason is that at some point there will be some kind of time scramble, and then the winner will be not the one that's better at chess, but the one that is better at using his mouse, which in general is not a very good way to decide the better player. And both players here are 1600, so basically at the beginner level, and 10 plus 0 is very little time. I would suggest playing with a lot more time, for example 30 plus 20, to get some time to think through your moves before making them. We will see what happens when both players don't really have much time. So the opening is some kind of Slav, already kind of a strange move order. If white plays d4, this move is only useful in a Slav defense, so there's no reason to just not play d5. But okay, there's probably nothing too bad about this, as long as black plays d5 now to play the Slav. But instead black plays e6 for some reason, which doesn't really make much sense since e6 only prepares d5. Or you can play the Nimzo Indian, but then the c6 move doesn't make sense. Now white could have just taken the center with e4 and claimed an advantage. Instead, at some point it just became some kind of semi-Slav position, and both sides developed. And here white played c5 and fixed the structure, which in general isn't a very good idea here, as white can become overextended. And here it's important for black to know the plan of the structure. So whenever white clears this tension on d5 and pushes c5, in general this means black should strike in the center with e5 one way or another. Because now d5 isn't hanging, so the e6 pawn isn't needed to defend here, and also this pawn on c5 is only protected by d4, so it makes sense to try to get rid of it. Black could already play e5 here. Tactically this works out very simply. For example here we can even play knight e4, but knight g4 is simple enough. We will take back this pawn, or that one, and black will be fine. And the point is to open this bishop eventually. b6 is also a move, but it doesn't really do much in this case, since white can defend. Bishop b7 doesn't really make much sense to put the bishop here again. Black should probably play a5 or something. Knight e4. Try to clear the position a little bit. Try to play e5 at some point. But okay, bishop b7 is playable. Now bishop e2. a3. Now black plays b5, which again doesn't really make much sense since black has created some kind of favorable tension. White is never going to take here or take here. Black can at any point take or push, but there's absolutely no reason to push here. Black is not gaining anything from relieving the tension here. Instead, he should develop or maybe get rid of this bad bishop by exchanging it here. But b5 gave white a free hand, and now this e5 plan won't work as well because c5 is very well defended. Queen b3 was played. This move, it's hard to understand this move because now, for one thing, white will not be able to recapture with a pawn on b4 because the a1 rook is hanging, so this move is only counterproductive, and the queen itself is doing absolutely nothing on b3, so it's hard to understand this move. Black didn't use his chance to use the opponent's mistake by taking here. It's important that white cannot take back like this. After queen b4, black can now develop his pieces. a3 is a clear weakness. Black has no weaknesses basically, and he can continue by playing castling, doubling on the a file potentially, maybe even playing e5 to weaken c5, and he has a decent game. Instead, a4 completely closes the center without any reason. Again, this is favorable tension. Black really should learn about tension and how to maintain it and what it is. Because here, white is never going to take here, ruining his structure. So there is no reason for black to relieve the tension like this. Relieving the tension like this, there is a reason, because at this point white cannot recapture with the pawn. So that is different. a4 doesn't make much sense. The queen went back. h3. And now black eventually played e5, which is the best idea. He didn't really have to do all this. But now white finds a small tactic, which shouldn't really work out. He pins the knight, and black for some reason just says goodbye to his pawn and castles. He can just defend it. So there is no reason not to do this. White will have to take here eventually. Black can recapture. There is a pin here, but there's no big problem. And now white can even use these overextended pawns by creating a typical pawn sacrifice, a piece sacrifice for some pawns, like this. Black has to move the king, and for example castles. And now white has, for the piece, he has two pawns, two connected passed pawns. He has this great pin. Black is basically a rook down, as his rook is not in the game. And white can claim a pretty decent advantage here. Though of course this is quite advanced. But of course there's no reason to not defend the pawn. So now black is basically lost. He has one pawn less. He has zero compensation for it. And white has basically no problems. Now white gives up the bishop pair. Again, it's hard to explain why you would give up this bishop for this knight. Now white could just either develop like this, or even he can use the closed nature of the queenside to castle queenside. Oops. And then just launch an attack here to realize his winning positional and material advantage, quite simply like this. Since now that there's no tension on the queen side, black will have no counterplay. So instead white gives up the bishop pair, giving black some hope. And then bishop g4, which doesn't really make much sense, as well we have to assume that our opponent is not a monkey and he will not give away his queen. So queen e7 happened, castles, and now bishop c8 is a nice move. And now there was no reason for the bishop to go here, and black is happy to exchange off this bad bishop. This happens. Then knight e2, a bit unclear where. Bishop rook to f8, rook f to e1, queen e6, knight f4, queen e7, knight h5. So white is trying to exchange pieces, which in general is a decent strategy, but at some point he will have to win the game somehow. So this happens. Now white played queen d3. Again, it's unclear what the queen is doing here. Probably white should just try to play e4. Maybe he defended d4 for that reason. King g7. And now white played e4, opening the position. In general, white shouldn't have exchanged so many pieces, because now that there's only heavy pieces on the board, there are bigger drawing tendencies, since a lot of rook endgames can become equal even when one side has a pawn advantage. Now, of course, black has to take. The threat is to take here and weaken this pawn terminally, and create a weakness here as well. This black did not understand and wasted the move with this, after which he is just completely lost if white takes here. Now, if we just recapture, white can take here, and it's basically game over. Black is down 2 pawns. This is hanging, the queen is very active. And in general, there's just 2 connected passed pawns here, so there's not much to talk about here. Black can try to capture here first, with the argument that after this he can take on d4, but white doesn't really care about this pawn. He can just move his queen somewhere, and again, he has 2 connected passed pawns. The game is completely over. So it's very strange to blunder something like this, because clearly this was the threat. What else was white supposed to do? So white decided not to do this. He fought for 4 seconds on this move. Not a very long thing. Queen e6. Now again, black has some chances to hold. The position is not as bad. King f1 seems a bit useless. White has a pawn majority on the king side, so he just has to push it and basically attack for free. Black doesn't really have much to do. But okay. Eventually some stuff happens. Queen g5. White is trying to attack the king, which is possible, of course. Rook f6, rook d3, and it seems like it should be over quite soon. Now black is simply threatening to win a pawn, and white's rook is pinned, so he cannot move. So logically, he should just defend the pawn, right? And continue attacking. Maybe play h4 at some point, maybe g4 to just open up the king. Black cannot move anything. He is a pawn down. He has no activity. The game should be quite over. Instead, white goes here and simply gives up the pawn, which is kind of hard to understand. Now black is not worse at all, because the position is completely symmetrical, and black even has a bit more space, arguably. This pawn on d4 is easier to attack than this one, long term. White decided to create a passed pawn for black for some reason, by putting the queen on e5. Now we got some kind of rook endgame, where both sides have 3 minutes without any increments, so we can't really expect many good moves to happen here. Rook e8, f4, f6. So black is playing well. He is opening the e-file. Now there is a weakness on the e5 square, g5. A pretty instructive move here would have been h4 to fix the pawn on g2 to gain some space, take away the g3 square. Next black can play like this, because in the game, as we can see, white had a decent move in g4, cutting off the king, fixing the pawn on g5, hopefully trying to infiltrate eventually, after bringing the king here. King f2 happened, king g6, now king f3, and king f5. So now the pawn is attacked, and black should be able to win this pawn and then win the game. Or he can even use this route to open up his king and start pushing his passed pawn. So white had to understand this and put the pawn on g4 before it was too late. But king f3 instead, king f5, g4. Now it's a bit too late, because black could play king e6 and then use his rook to infiltrate through the h4 square or even through the h-file. Instead, black put his king back on g6 for some reason. Clearly it's much more active on e6 since it's attacking a pawn, and there's also this maneuver. Rook e2 happened. Now the king tried to go here, king g6. There's no reason not to take the pawn, but king g6, king goes back. Some moves happened. White got some counterplay. And now this should kind of be a draw since white's rook is quite active, but it will not be easy. Rook d7 is a very good move to stop d4 and threaten rook d6 in some positions. King f6, now rook d8, king e7, and the rook has to go out. Rook d5. And from here, black played pretty well. Here white's only chance was rook d7, with the idea of king e5, king e3, not allowing this, and now d4 is stopped, well, importantly. But rook c8 happened, bit of a waste of time, and now the king can come into the game. Hopefully it goes to c3 or somewhere similar, or maybe take this pawn. Rook g8 kind of ignores black's play. King e3 is probably the only chance. Black has to play d4, and now the only way to win for black is to get this pawn, which is simple enough. Oftentimes he can even take this one, but probably the rook should defend the pawn for now. After rook g8, black plays a pretty obvious mistake, which is going passive with his king. Of course, so in general we don't want to give up pawns, but in endgames pawns are not the question. What we need is piece activity, especially the king and the rook in rook endgames. So here king d4 should win quite simply. For example, here king c3. White has a passed pawn, but his passed pawn will not become anything. The king is cut off. The pawn will at least go to d2 undisturbed, and then it should even promote, and white will not have any counterplay at all. So activity wins it, as usual. But king f6 again gives white some chances. Here both sides have a minute left, so again, take these moves with a grain of salt. I expect the players to be able to play better chess whenever they have more time. The rook f5 was played, and now black plays a terribly passive move rook g6, after which the position is objectively drawn, mainly because the king is able to come to d4, and there's no way for black to activate his rook anymore. Here, black had a pretty simple win with rook f6, just transposing into a pawn endgame, which should be extremely easily winning because he has a connected fast pawn here. So again, I would expect the players to find such a move, but with 1 minute on the clock, they weren't really looking for good moves anymore. So rook g6 happened. After a few moves, the position was drawn, though of course black is still pressing. White should go and take the c6 pawn, and the position will equalize eventually. Instead, g5 was played, and now black found a nice simplifying tactic, rook f3, a very good move, using that the rook is not defended anymore, and now he got a very easily winning pawn endgame with 2 pawns up, and the rest of the game is not very interesting. So what I would suggest is to play games with longer time controls, because here it's unclear which moves were made because of lack of skill and which moves were made because of lack of time. Usually we want to make mistakes because of our lack of skill, not because of time pressure, because only then we can see what we're actually good at and what we have to improve at. So that will be my advice.